So we are here to talk about management. More specifically, the difference between traditional management and self-management. Can I ask how many of you in the room are artists that have no traditional management? Right, exactly. So as the music industry changes, and there's a real sense that we are CEOs of our own little companies, and I do feel that people in the wider industry are starting to take note of that. So with that, the industry is changing. So I'd love to explore how the role of management is changing, what the challenges are, both for managers and for self-managed artists in that environment. And then I'd like to cover new models of management that might be more relevant to us. So in order to kick off, I'd just like to nip round the panel, and if you could all please just introduce yourselves, tell us a little about what you do, and then briefly answer the question, what does a manager do?
Okay, so I'll start. My name's Keith Harris. My role here is to be music business old guy, to kind of hopefully put some of it into perspective. I'm a manager. I've been a manager really since 1978. But these days, I'm a consultant at PPL. I'm actually chairing the Equality and Diversity Task Force for the music industry. I'm the chairman of something called Music Tank, and that will do for now.
What does a manager do?
Oh, do you want me to do that now? Yeah. Okay. A manager is basically the interface between art and commerce. So the manager needs to kind of understand what the artist is trying to achieve, but they also need to understand the commercial imperative, because artists, like everybody else, need to eat. Right? So the traditional manager will sit as an interface between the business end and the artistic end, and try to make sure that it all joins up and works, because the mindset of artists tends to be different from the mindset of business people broadly, and you need to kind of adopt, as an artist, if you're trying to do your own management, you kind of almost need to wear two heads, which a lot of the time are not compatible. If you have traditional management, the manager will sit in the middle and deal with that incompatibility of the two worlds that you're striding.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Fiona McGugan. I work for the Music Managers Forum. We are a representative body of artist management. We've got about 500 members here in the UK, and our main job is to educate those managers, to support them, to help them do the jobs that they do as best as they can. We provide opportunity for them, and we also advocate for them, so we represent their voice in arenas like the UK government, European government, and also to big tech companies and anyone who really impacts on the music business. The role, what does a manager do? That was such a good answer. I don't know if I'm going to be able to top it. I think what we see at the MMF is that the role of the manager is constantly changing, particularly over the last 2 to 3 years. The role has now just expanded so much so that in all artist businesses, the manager pretty much has to do, I think there's a famous phrase started by my boss at the MMF, is that managers used to have to know 50 things, then they had to know 500 things. Now they pretty much have to know 1,000 things. If you look at the artist business and the makeup of it, how much that's expanding in terms of the various different income streams and the complexities of the business, it's the manager's job to stay on top of all of those individual income streams. So you mentioned artists are the chief execs of their own business, and I would agree that when you get a manager on board, it kind of gives you the freedom to become the creative director of that business and the manager to be the chief exec, if you like, and take on that role.
Thank you. Matt?
Hello, I'm Matt Harbey. I'm also a manager. I work for Paper House Music and Hydrogen Jukebox. We manage Susie and the Banshees, Broken Hands, who are a band from Kent, recently signed to Atlantic. We manage Smoke Fairies, who are signed to Rounder Records, who are an indie. And then we've got 2 independent artists, Helium and Dolls. We look after some publishing. We look after some booking for those bands. And we look after 2 producers, one of which Tom Dalgety, who's produced Royal Blood, the Pixies, nominated for UK Producer of the Year at the MPGs in February. And Christopher Harris, who this year's worked with Bell and Sebastian and Ghost Poet and The People. And what we do is, it became a bit of a joke of one of our bands, but we sort of said that what I do for them is I'm the band member that plays the emails and phone calls. So they're on the stage doing that, and I'm still tapping away on my phone, sorting out what is happening tomorrow or whatever, if you're doing a bit of tour management. So what we do is we cover quite a broad spectrum of different types of management. But essentially, what the manager does is sit in the middle, but the way I sort of see it, of a spider diagram, and you've got all the lawyers, the accountants, the publishers, the record companies, the agents, and now you've got the people like Spotify, and you've got Apple, and you've got distribution companies that you work directly with as well. So you're sat in the middle of that, and you've got to somehow make all of that spin and work together, and at the end of the day, if it goes wrong, it's always going to be your fault and none of those other people's. That's our job.
Is it too early for Spinal Tap quotes? Reminded me of that bit where the manager says, you always focus on the one thing that goes wrong, but for the one thing that goes wrong, there are a million things that go right. So Lisbee, what does a self-manager do?
Yeah, so I'm Lisbee Stainton. I am a self-managed artist. I'm in the unique position where I've been managed, and I chose about 6 years ago to become a self-managed artist as well. So as an artist, I've been professional for about 11 years, and I've released 6 studio albums and have toured the UK and Europe and Scandinavia and supported some amazing artists and have had a great time in general. But what it's really interesting is, what does a self-managed artist do? I guess I thought it was really interesting you said about the two heads, connecting those two brains, and that is, I guess, what I have to do on a daily basis. And I know a lot of you are self-managed as well, so it's really interesting to see that. It's actually understanding that there are those two brains. You've got your creative artist brain, and then you've got you have to have the manager brain on, and it's knowing which one to use. And the best way I can describe it is just having a huge workload and having to be very, very organised. That's pretty much what I have to do, and create a very strong team around me, agent, lawyer, publisher, etc. And have instead of having that middleman, you're forging those relationships directly, which is actually what I love about what I do as well, that I have this close team around me who I can communicate with directly. There are challenges, I'm sure you'll come on to this in a minute of it, but it's understanding there are those two minds and being able to access both of them, I think, is the key.
Perfect. Thank you. What an eloquent panel. You're making my job very easy. So, question to the managers. I see you've got your mic at the ready. Yeah. There's this, what I feel is a bit of a hangover from a bygone era where people tend to still be a bit suspicious of artists who can string a sentence together, and who know how spreadsheets work. I don't really know how spreadsheets work, but anyway. So, question to the managers. What roles does a manager fulfill today and going forward, given that there are lots of artists like Lisbee and many artists in the room who quite successfully have kicked off and are building sustainable careers, managing to jump between those two hats and heads, as it were?
Okay. One of the things I should have said, I suppose, is that in management, my longest serving client that I've worked with for 39 years.
Yes, you should have mentioned that.
Is Stevie Wonder. And so looking at management, it depends on the scale. Yeah. Because if you are self-managed, I think it's okay up to a point, right? And then there comes a point where the amount of work that you are creating either gets in the way of your creativity, because you're actually spending your time, calling about the money from the last gig that hasn't turned up when you should actually be writing songs, which is, part of the trouble. The other thing is that it's also great being, the center of your own universe. But one of the key roles of the manager is to get fired, right? And I say that, and I mean it, because often when things start going wrong, right, it is quite useful to have one part of the chain that you can replace and hope to revitalise everything. It's exactly the same in football management. I mean, the manager's not playing, but they sack the manager and hope that it's going to reboot the relationship. The trouble is, if you are the manager and the artist and things start to go wrong with your agent and your promoter, and you are the person that's going to get fired. And then you find yourself out in the wilderness. So that, so the manager, that is one of the key roles still of a manager, is when things are going wrong, get rid of the manager, get somebody else in. Then you don't have to blame yourself.
But on a day-to-day basis, I appreciate that this changes by scale. So managing Broken Hands is probably looks a lot different than managing Stevie Wonder at the moment. So if you could both, like, what are the actual day-to-day roles and things that you would do as a manager if you're not getting fired that day?
Okay. Well, I ought to also say that my son is a modern manager. He works at a company called September Management, and he manages 4 artists. He manages a girl called Lapsley, Jamie Woon, Aquilo, and Son. Right. So I kind of see what he has to do, and Webbo's quote is absolutely right, which is that the manager now has to be on top of so much more than they used to, because it used to be the management role really used to be about managing the people in the record company that your artist was signed to, making sure that all those people are working correctly and in a coordinated way on your artist. Now that's no longer the thing. The manager is actually the centre of absolutely everything, from your social media profile all the way through to your accounting, to your touring, to absolutely everything. And the manager actually has to be on top of all those elements, which there's not really enough time in the day for the manager to do that. So I think that the modern manager has actually become more important, ironically, to an artist. And I think that even for self-managed artists, there will come a time, if you are successful enough, where you're going to want to divest that. Because over the last couple of weeks, I've been, particularly in Norway, I remember, and I was at an artist panel in Norway, and on the panel there were 2 artists who had been reasonably successful, who had basically got to nervous breakdown, because they were trying to look after their home career, and particularly their social media side. That seems to be the thing which is tipping people over, because there's such a lot of work involved in managing your own social media, and from an artist's point of view, artists tend to be generally more sensitive than the rest of us, particularly managers, and so some of the abuse that artists are getting online is really disturbing, and I think it's getting harder for artists to manage that side of things as well. So in short, there is still, I think, a really important role for a manager once an artist gets to a certain point. I think you can stay on top of your career, and there's no reason why you have to get to that, to that unmanageable level. If you're happy going at that level and making a living at that level, and it's just long-term and sustainable, that's fine. If you are looking to make that kind of quantum leap to sort of international stardom, then at some point, I think it's advisable to get somebody to take the flag.
Thank you. Matt, can you add anything to that in terms of day-to-day tasks and things that you do before we move on to hearing the artist's point of view in this?
Yeah, sure. So a good example of what's going on that we've got to do this week is we have a band, Broken Hands, that are going to the studio on Sunday. They've got their A&R from New York flying in on Wednesday. And currently we have a budget that needs to be agreed. The band, however, have to rehearse like mad because they're about to record their second album, and it's their first one on Atlantic Records, and the pressure is sky high. But they've got us sat in an office in London taking phone calls. Doug, my partner, is arguing about money. I'm sorting the logistics, and at the same time, I don't think you can be like, do you know what, that second verse, second line, it's just not it's not going to cut it, is it? Let's go for a walk and think about what I'm going to do, and try and get your head switching between the two, I think, is the difference that gives you an edge if you've got someone else to do the stuff that you don't want to do, because you're probably better at being an artist if that is what you want to be. Now, I started off in my own band, which was rubbish, and you can look it up on the internet and agree with me, but I was quite good at getting people to the gig, and I was quite good at getting press, and I was quite good at getting on the radio and stuff, but my mate's band were like 10 times better than us. And they couldn't get gigs, and they didn't know who to speak to, and they didn't know how to approach an email to get a gig or whatever, like ridiculous as it sounds. But they were really, really good at songs. So I said, I'll book you gigs. And then within about a month, we'd got onto, I think, Radio X, XFM at the time. And we had a gig with like 30 people from the music industry turning up at the Dublin Castle when that was like where A&R people went as well, yeah. So you can see how far back I'm going. But the point being is that, yeah, I was in my own band, but I wasn't that good, and I was all focused on that, but I was actually not really focused on the music. I was focused on the admin, the MySpace of the time or whatever. And like you said, if you get drawn into the detail of that sort of stuff, the manager can add a certain amount of strategy to it and say, look, do you know what, that's actually not that important, because where you're going, don't get drawn into that. Where you need to go is that, and essentially where that is great gigs and great songs. And if you don't have that, then you haven't got anything to market anyway. So you, as an artist, focus, it needs to be there. But if you can get a manager, or you want a manager, they should take care of the stuff you don't want to do, and they'll do it in a flamboyant, sort of arrogant way, I'm sure. But essentially, the right manager can, I think, definitely add and sync everything that you're doing together. If you've got the right music, it all comes down to that at the end of the day. And if you're spending time making sure a tweet gets retweeted correctly with the right or whatever, then you're not going to be writing the best songs. You're not going to be managing in the best way you could either. So I think it's just the balance. But what we do is the stuff the band shouldn't be distracted into doing, I think. And if we don't do it, we get someone else to do it. If we can afford them.
Thank you so much. So interesting. I have so many questions, but I need to save them for later on in this discussion. So, Lisbee, does that all sound right to you? Would you agree that those are things that a manager should do? Are those all roles that you have to do yourself? And are these things the things that you look for if you are talking to potential traditional managers? I just threw a bunch of questions at you.
I agree with everything that you said, and I agree. I think after a certain point, the workload is very heavy, and I'm sure, you get to a certain level of success, and you have to get help. That's the point that you were making, pretty much. You need the help with the workload. What I think I would argue is that the role of the manager has changed, and it can change. It's a much more malleable. I think artists are very much in control nowadays of their brand, who they are, what they're doing, the kind of fan interaction they have, the closeness that we have to our fans. We've never had this before in the music industry, that level of direct interaction that fans really, really love and that they cherish and that they want from us. It's kind of taken the place of going out and buying a CD, because not everything, but digital is king now. Fans still want that visceral something, whether instead of holding an album in their hands, they want to talk to you. They want to get a response from you directly. So there is that. I've forgotten all the questions you asked me. What were you? but
so you generally you agree that yes, those are all things that a manager does, but
yeah. It's possible. I think certainly up and coming artists now recognize that. I would say that the attitude that an artist is very sensitive and has to have a very creative brain and possibly can't do those other things is a little limiting, and perhaps a slightly past way of thinking about the music industry now. I think to be a successful artist, you have to know all the things. You have to know as much as you possibly can, because you need to know about publishing. You need to know about copyright. You need to know about what your agent's doing and how they do it, what the radio plug is doing and how they're doing it. And it makes sense to forge those relationships as an artist as well. Of course, I totally agree. It's incredibly useful to have the people on your side helping with the admin and with all the things that perhaps an artist shouldn't have to do. But the reality is that artists have to do that now. A lot of us have to. So we have to know about it. And so we have to formulate those two hats, those two brains, and be able to find the time to, yes, write your album, be creative, go for walks and think about it, but also do the admin, do the spreadsheets, get on the social media, work out what your brand is, how you are cultivating it, where you'd like to be in 10 years' time, all these kind of things an artist has to be thinking about at the same time.
Keith, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that actually hasn't changed. When I started working with Stevie, which was 1978, he'd had his first hit record in 1963. And certainly for at least the first 2 years, I was learning from him about the business, how it works. He totally understands how the business works. And most artists, even from that era, understood how the business worked. It's not that artists suddenly now know how the business worked and they didn't used to. They know. They just don't want to deal with that because they feel that it kind of gets in the way of what they are primarily going to do. There's a misconception, that managers have kind of told the artist what to do. And now artists tell the manager what to do. The artist has always told the manager what to do. The manager is employed by the artist, and that's always been the case. So it's not that somehow managers have been pushing artists around for years and years and years, and things have now changed. It is true that artists can actually do more for themselves now, but that relationship fundamentally hasn't changed. The manager is employed by the artist, and you take your direction from the artist and what they want to achieve.
So that kind of brings me on to my next question, and also it's going back to Lisbee, what you touched on, this thing of the role of. I appreciate that. I totally agree. By the way, I think if you were a clued up artist, you always knew how things worked, and you always had a team that worked well. But seeing as the role of manager is more malleable in the sense that depending on what kind of artist you are, the manager, the role of management could look totally different depending on that. So this might be slightly contentious, but the thing that I was thinking about with regards to this panel, and from me to you specifically, and it might have to do with scale, like you said earlier, but actually, all the artists that are on stage today, they all make music full time. They all run a profitable business. And I don't think any of us have managers. That's coincidence, but that dawned on me last night. And the amount of times I talk to managers and they tell me, I've just signed this new artist, very early days, in development phase, they're 14 years old, they've written 2 songs and they've never played a show in their life. It always makes me think, why is it perhaps more appealing to manage an artist right from the ground up, so you perhaps have more stake and creative involvement in it, but surely it will take at least 3 years before you see any kind of money coming through? And why is it potentially harder for self-made full-time artists who already have a profitable business? Why is it seemingly harder for them to get a manager on board to then scale it up? To the managers.
I'll answer if you want,
question.
but I think I've spoken quite a lot already.
Matt, would you like to?
Sure,
Fiona.
I'll go for it. Why not? I talk to a lot of managers day in, day out. I really like this line of questioning, though, because I can't tell you how many panels I've been on over the last year where the main question, and it's a majority artist audience, and the main question is, how do I get a manager?
Right.
I really need a manager. It's the first step I must take on my journey as an artist. And this conversation's completely flipped it on its head. And I think the goal should absolutely be to be a self-sustaining artist and to run your own business before you get or you start building your team in any real sense, really. The call we get most at the MMF is from artists saying, how can I get a manager? Can you recommend a manager that I can get on board? And my answer is always to them, well, what are you expecting that manager to do? And I've actually had the opposite conversation with managers to the one you've had, where if the artist is, at such early days, they can't physically take them on if there is, unless they really absolutely believe in the music and can see the future for it. These days, I've been meeting with a group of emerging managers, if you like, for the last year. And the biggest problem for managers at the moment is the traditional ways that they got paid have literally, the bottom's just fallen out of it.
Right.
Because there are no advances anymore. And managers are finding it increasingly difficult to, they don't want to commission on anything in the first 2-3 years, the stuff that's coming in. And it's, how do you reach that point where you can commission without putting the artist's business at risk? Going back to what you guys said earlier, I think the point of getting a manager on board is when you can no longer handle the incoming inquiries. That's kind of the point where you sort of realise this business has grown beyond my capability. I need to hire somebody. And then the way of getting that person on board is what you were saying, is to look at what you do well as an artist and then find somebody. You're basically hiring someone and you need to write a job description for them because you want them to do all the things that you don't want to do. But I think calling that person a manager is almost misleading in a way, because we've all kind of got an idea in our heads of what managers do and what that word means. And actually, as an artist, if you're a self-sustaining artist and you need someone to come along and add value to your business, that person may not even necessarily be a manager. And giving it that job title is probably quite misleading, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's a really important point and is leading us into the next and final bit of this. By the way, I was so excited to get the show rolling. I have no idea what time it is. So can anyone tell me how much time we've got left?
It's 1:15.
Quarter past. Okay, good. So that's a good exercise. Let's all go home and write a job description for that person we need. And maybe it's not a manager. Maybe what you actually need is
What? It's 11:58. I've been travelling a lot.
It's a sign of a great manager, right? Yeah. Yes. Oh my God. Actually, so Diane Wagg is another wonderful manager, and I spoke to her over coffee about this, and she said that one of her bands in the 90s, shall we say, speaking of what's your role as a manager, this is an aside, but I think it's funny. So she would get a phone call from her band, and it would just be, Diane, what time is it? And then she'd tell them again, all right, thanks. So thanks for that, Keith. So yeah, it might not be a manager that you need. You might need an accountant, or you might need a personal assistant. So let's all go home and write a job description. Fiona, have you seen that change within the MMF and the new managers? So what can we talk about? What those potentially new models of working together, what they are and what that looks like. I know the MMF and the MU and the FAC have created this template management agreement, which is a great step forward, but hopefully I think there'll be more to come in terms of different types of model contracts. Could you talk a little about, I hear that artists are now signing more like business partnership agreements, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think speaking to a room of artists, this might be a little bit controversial. But I think as the MMF, we had our 25th anniversary this year. And looking back over the history of us as an organisation and all the issues that we've dealt with and all the campaigns that we've done, every single one has been artist-led. And it is partly because of that commission model. Where the artist benefits, the manager benefits, based on the traditional way of doing things. So all the campaigns, we've been artist-focused, we've been very much looking at transparency in the business, how artist businesses get paid, how they make their money. I think this year is the very first time we've ever looked at the manager on their own as a being and thought, hold on a minute, there is more money flowing into the industry than ever before. I think if people tell you there's no money in it, I don't think that's true
They're
at
lying.
all. They are. And particularly streaming. I think there's a lot of money that can be made from streaming if you're doing it the right way. But in terms of the manager, it's like they are at the back of the chain when it comes to getting paid. So recently we've been looking at various different types of business models, and it's really early days to be looking at this. And I think even educating lawyers, we're sort of day one of that and saying, you know, because the likelihood is if a manager goes to the table with an artist to sign a deal and says, look, I've got this new idea of how we might do business together, it's a profit share or a 50-50, or I want to be on a salary, I think the lawyer, even if the artist in the first instance is like, all right, let's try it, it's very likely that the lawyer is going to turn around to the artist and say, no way, this is a mad way of doing things, this is not how things are done. I don't know if there are any lawyers in the room, and I'm becoming one, so this isn't against lawyers, but I think they maybe traditionally have a bit of a vendetta, some of them, against managers, so maybe they quite enjoy sticking the knife in every now and again. But I think that's a long-term education process, and how we change those business models and how we work together, that's what's going to keep good managers in the game as well. Because I think what I'm personally quite worried about is looking at how emerging managers are trying to create sustainable businesses. I'm really concerned that we're losing a massive pool of talent of managers because they cannot sustain in the business at the moment with the way things are, which isn't a very succinct wrap up, but I'm very conscious I'm starting to...
No, that's fine.
I mean, I think Fiona's right. I mean, there is a big problem in terms of the traditional relationship between artist and manager, certainly as far as the businesses has seen it. Because I think as Matt pointed out, it used to be that as a manager, you would get your artist and you would shop them to get a major record deal. And once you got a major record deal, there was enough money for you to sustain your business for at least a year and a half. Now those advances aren't there. So you get a young manager managing a new artist, they get them a deal, there's still no money, and they're supposed to then sustain themselves for 2, maybe 3 years. And even then, there is still, and it's the traditional thing, there is still that resentment that the manager is going to be earning, because people seem to feel that managers somehow are kind of the parasites of the business. No, I mean, this being realistic about it, that's the undertone of a lot of what is said, which is you don't really need a manager because, I mean, the manager doesn't really do anything. And that's the logical progression. And therefore, young managers are finding it extremely difficult just to sustain themselves.
So this is really interesting. So we can kind of all agree that traditional model doesn't work for either party, really. It doesn't do...
In some genres, it does. It's not
in
one
the
size fits all.
Would that be in a more pop genre, perhaps?
No, I think the managers that I tend to speak to and the commission model works very well for them are the ones that are managing the sort of dance, DJ, producer types where overheads of touring are very, very low. That it does still, I don't think, it's very dangerous, I think, to have a one-size-fits-all solution for anyone or to say that this model doesn't work for anyone. Because I think in some cases the traditional 20% commission does work sometimes.
Okay. But to summarise what was just said here, so potentially, from the artist's point of view, that old management model and all the connotations that it brings with it doesn't do the artist entrepreneur justice, doesn't do the artist justice because it doesn't portray them as being able and capable to steer their own ship and grow their own company. And equally, it doesn't do the manager justice because it is so difficult to just off that relatively small percent of a pie that's mostly not very big to begin with. A lot is expected of that person, and the remuneration for that is often almost non-existent. So going forward, Matt?
I was going to say, like, what we're sort of referring to where the management maybe become a partnership with the artist is maybe some sort of like towards a heritage act who might go for, doesn't need a record label anymore, gets a label services deal. And at that point, you're earning 75 or 80% of the money coming in, and the label services are taking 20%, as opposed to the other way around where the artist is just getting 20% and then the manager's getting, 4% or whatever it is out of that. Whereas if you then, and this is the strange thing with the industry as it is, because the people that are going into these things with the label services companies have been with their artists for years because they're heritage artists, and they're probably still on 20%. Whereas as the industry evolves around and you get new bands that are currently out now going into the label services, it might be at that point where it can be balanced out so that it does become a company and the manager isn't on 20% like any sort of normal business. Would the person that's in the middle actually controlling the lawyers and the accountants actually get 20%? I don't know. You'd probably just get a decent wage, wouldn't you? I don't know. But if your band is touring the world and taking 80% of every bit of music sold or streamed or whatever, then 20% is a hell of a lot of money. So I don't know. It goes both ways, but I think we're in a weird point where the bands that can command the huge amount of money that makes it look like the manager's making too much are already way along the line, and they're not going to have many more records to go. So the bands that are currently now, like Foles or someone like that, who are probably going to be around for album upon album, what they do around their business, which is a real business, is interesting to see what happens. I think that's just, we don't know.
Yeah.
So
if I were to try and take all of these wise nuggets and wrap a ribbon around them at this point so we can go to questions. An artist today absolutely does have to know all the things, because for the things you don't know, you are going to have to team up with people who do know. So try and know all the things. However, you can't know all the things. This is me at my most eloquent, guys. So get to that point where you know what you don't know, write a job description, see what that person actually is, the areas that you need help in, and then we all need to grow our teams eventually, but keep in mind that the traditional definition of a manager, that is perhaps not necessarily appropriate for you or what you need. And managers absolutely is still a place for them, but it's very interesting to see that clearly, whether it's management firms such as yourself, Paper House, or the MMF as an entire body, we're all thinking and looking at ways forward to make it work for both parties and come up with new and innovative models. Right. Is that a ribbon? Do you have any clever closing words for us before we go to questions?
Well, one of the things that I was going to come back and address one of the questions you asked earlier, which was about artists getting to a certain level and then looking for management and finding it difficult. And I was going to say that one of the things which is often overlooked in management is that managers often get into the business because they feel very passionate about an artist and their music and feel that they ought to be able to get them to the next level. And they actually want to work really hard. And the satisfaction is taking an artist that you have spotted the talent and you have made all that effort and getting them to the next level. So to be brought in to an act that you don't necessarily feel that much about, I'm not saying you don't like, but you're not necessarily passionate about, just because there's money there, the relationship is going to be slightly different. That doesn't mean the manager can't do their job, but it's a very different relationship. One of the reasons why young managers quite like to find their own acts is because a lot of people came into the business because they're passionate about music, and they found an act which is undiscovered that they think should be, doing much better than they are, much more widely known. And the reason they came in is to drive that through. It's a very different feeling when you just pick up on an act that's already doing something and do the administrative function of getting them to the next level.
But hopefully falling in love with the music and the artist and the passion that's there, could be found with a 14-year-old artist who's playing their first show, or with someone who happens to already be making some money with it.
It could be, but I think it's probably a little bit more difficult. I mean, partly because, as you've just said, if you have an artist who comes to you and says, right, here's your job description, this is what I want you to do, just this, this and this, it takes the passion out of it. Because, you feel, well, I'm being employed to do a sort of day-to-day job. It's not the same as the excitement of trying to drive an artist to the next level, which is, it's a different feeling. I think, in a way, you're trying to ride two horses with this. Right?
Two hats, two horses.
And I think it's quite hard. If you actually want a manager who's really passionate about your career, then you need to approach it slightly differently from employing somebody to do the functional
So,
stuff on a
so
day-to-day basis.
how should one approach it?
I have a good one here. So like, I often get asked, people email daily saying, here's our new thing, will you manage us? And normally, you will listen to it and you probably go, sometimes, occasionally, you'll be like, this is actually really good, and you find out a bit more. I find when someone says, straight up, can you give me some advice about finding management? Often the worst thing you can do is approach the big management companies, because the way you get into management is being passionate about music. I think that's what, as you're sort of saying the same thing, is that I think every individual artist here will have someone in their team who really, really cares about what they do. And that's the best thing a manager can do for you. Whether they know that they've got to argue to get X amount at a gig because it's someone else is getting that or whatever, doesn't matter. It's just that they're on the phone saying, no, you said we had this gig. It's like, I know it's like 10 to 12 at night or whatever, but I'm like, we're playing tomorrow, that's what you said. That's a manager. It's not someone in a suit who knows someone over at Universal can make one phone call, because Universal aren't be passionate either, they're just doing their mate a favour. They've got to be buying into the artist just like anyone. So find a manager who's passionate, and that's probably the person that's up for driving you to the gig. They can probably do those jobs that you're saying, I need this, this and this done.
Yeah.
They'll be like, I can do that, I'd love to do that. As long as they can do it professionally,
Yeah.
you've probably got the best manager you could ever get.
Thank you. That's nice positive advice. So, Lisbee, let's end this panel with the artist, shall we? So, if you haven't found the person that's happy to drive you yet, so you're self-managing, self-driving, driving yourself.
It's interesting. I think I really like the way you're going with this, and it's interesting. Passion is incredibly important in that. And I, as an artist, I have an internal rule where I won't work with anyone who's not passionate about what I'm doing, because there's no point. If they're only in it for the money, and if the money's not there, then they're not going to stay very long, are they? So, the best thing you can do is find people who give a crap and work with them. And if that's an agent, if that's a manager, I often find myself, because you can't do everything and you can't know all the things. No human, it's a life rule, never mind a management rule. So sometimes you got to ask for help. And it's where you go to ask for help. And I know if you have a team around you who love what you're doing and they all have different jobs, sometimes I'll ring my agent and go, would you mind doing me a little favour? I know it's slightly outside your remit, but I don't have time to do it. Please, could you send this mail out for me? And my agent loves what I do, and he'll go, yeah, I'd love to, no problem. That is help. That's the help. That's like the job description. It's a very small thing, but I think the key is, yes, the artist can do all the things, just about, but you've got to have people around you as well who care enough to help out, who drive you to the gig, who help you with the mail out, that kind of thing. And is that a manager? It might be. It might be a personal assistant. It might be your lawyer. It might be, who knows, but someone who will help you out.
So to close, can you give 3 top tips
For self-management.
for self-management if you can't call on other people?
Okay, so I think the key is knowing your strengths, first of all. It's kind of broad, but you have to know what you're good at, just as much you have to know what you're not good at. And that leads me on to the second point, which is ask for help from anyone who gives a crap about what you're doing. Doesn't have to be a manager. It can be your next door neighbour, it can be your dad, it can be your sister. Ask for help. Or it's a life rule, but you can't do everything, so know when to ask for help. And lastly, I think the 2-hat thing comes back. It's understanding the balance between your 2 hats and not getting that balance too far on one side. So don't sacrifice your creativity for doing the admin. Sometimes you've got to put one aside in order to get the other one right. And it might be the other way around, but you have to know. I tend to divide my week up into, today is my admin day. I'm going to get all of that really rubbish stuff that I'm not quite as fond of doing done. Tomorrow afternoon, I am going to be writing, and I will turn my phone off during the afternoon, and then in the evening, I'll do whatever admin came up during the afternoon when I wasn't there. It's the 2 hats thing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we should take some questions from the room. Keith, what time is it?
12:16.
Perfect. Thank you. Does anybody have a question?
Thank you for those points. First one, if we're living in a kind of dystopian post-advance world where You know, it can take, as you said, 2 to 3 years before a manager starts seeing any money, or an artist for that matter. Firstly, what's the virtue in getting a record deal, and if not, what's the alternative business model to keep people going? Is it touring revenue? Is it streaming revenue? Like, how do people do it if there's no advances?
Well, I mean, there are obviously quite a lot of alternative revenue streams, and if you are a self-managed artist in control of your own work, then things like synchronization deals, you know, where you put your music to adverts or commercials, are important, because you have an advantage, because you're in control of all your rights. It's actually quicker and easier for you to get a synchronization deal than if it has to go through a record company or a publisher. You know, so that's one way. Then there's brand management partnerships, where I know of artists now who will make more money by being seen with a certain product than they do from selling their music, because, you know, the brands are prepared to pay to have that link. You know, so there are all kinds of alternative income streams now coming, which are not traditional. You know, and you can actually still earn money from your music, which is, for me, preferable, because the music always comes first.
I was just going to say, I think it's really important not to see label deals or just as one type of thing. I'm going to give Chris Carey a little bit of a shout out here, because we've been working with Chris for the last, how long has it taken us? 6 to 8 months to design a. It's really exciting, actually. You know, when you go, I don't know how exciting this is, but you know, when you go online and you get things like mortgage calculators, and you can work out, you know, when you're getting a loan, how long is it going to take you to pay that loan back? We've basically launched a mortgage calculator for label deals, which you could probably explain this a lot better, Chris. But basically, it gives you you can look at 10 different types of label deal, and I think that's the point. There isn't just one type of deal out there anymore. There's 10 different types, there's 10 different options that you as an artist could go for. And the point of this calculator is, if you've got maybe 2 or 3 different options in front of you and you're not quite sure what the long-term advantages are, or what you're giving up in the short term to gain in the long term, or vice versa, you can actually put some information into this calculator and use it to spit out some figures on different types. So if I'm just doing a TuneCore style distribution only model, where I'm paying £6 flat fee for all my distribution, what kind of money am I going to get if I get this number of streams, for example? So I think that's just an important point to make, as well as many other different ways of making money. You actually have a lot of different options when it comes to all those different types.
By the way, Chris Carey is going to be on our final panel of the day, which is the Ask Me Anything panel. So if anyone wants to ask Chris about that
Chris
later on, do. Are there any more questions?
Oh, hello. I'm Laura Kidd. I'm solo artist She Makes War. And seems to me that all of the good managers are busy doing good things for their existing artists. So I've been putting records out for a few years now and self-managing for most of that time. And I know exactly what I need someone to do, which is to bring in opportunities that I can't find myself. So things that will immediately make money. So once I've written this job description you've mentioned, what do I do with it? Where do I go to find this magical person who's going to help me? Anyone?
What are you going to do with your job description? I think Keith's point was very interesting, and I didn't mention this, and I think I'm going to talk about it more, because every single manager I've ever spoken to has always got into management by accident. And I think the job description definitely comes in where it's so bad that we just refer to all these people as managers, because they are all so completely different. If I've learned anything working with managers for the past 5 years, they are all completely different. They have a completely different skill set. And I think that's the point. If you're in conversations with people that you want to work with and you're looking to build your team, and the ways of sourcing those people are as broad as the ideas in your head, whether you're going to the music universities and talking to the music management students there who want to get good experience, who potentially have already managed a couple of artists, or if you're I don't know, you could be speaking to someone who's looking to potentially leave the industry that they're in but has some transferable skills. It is down to finding that person who has passion for your music, and you can only do that by going out and having conversations with people and choosing where you want to target. I think the job description comes in where you are talking about specifically hiring that person for a specific task. If you're looking for, it sounds like you're looking for someone to come on board to bring opportunity. That does sound like a more traditional manager type role. And it's the age-old question. It's the question we get asked every day. How do I find one of these managers? And they are like gold dust, unfortunately. They are. The ones with loads and loads of experience who've been doing this for years, you have to catch them at the right moment when they are looking to expand their roster. And I know a few. Our job as the MMF is not to matchmake artists and managers. We're very clear about that. It is like trying to find your husband or your wife. It's that kind of relationship. It's that personal. But I'm always happy to have a listen, and I generally do have conversations with managers who are looking to expand rosters. So if I think there is a conversation to be had, I'm always happy to do that, but not a dating service.
Thank you. I think we have time for another question.
Back in my country, I have 2 friend bands that they want me to be the manager, but actually it's not my thing because I'm a visual artist and I work with films. So what are the first steps to manage? Like, I'm really passionate about them, I believe them, and I really would like to do it, but what are the first steps to manage a band, like your friend bands? Do you have an advice?
You go to the pub and you talk about what they want to do, where they see themselves being, what they think they're good at, what they need help with. You talk about where they're at with live shows, where they're at with recordings, what's there to go, ready to go, what they need to record, do they have stuff ready to go, or do they need to do some work on that? And you work out what steps they need to take to get themselves that next level up wherever they're at. So whether it's they need to take from local touring to going national, or whether they have a single that's really good but maybe an EP would be easier to get press for, or whatever. It's like, what is the next step? And then you just get them involved, and it evolves like that. You probably would want to write out a bit of a plan, a 6-month plan or something like that.
They have like really big plans. They want to move to another country, and they want me to do absolutely everything for them. They just want to create the thing, So
I agree with everything Matt said, except Matt missed out one thing which I think is really important.
Make them buy the drinks.
That is really important as well. But what I had in mind is, are they prepared to work really hard? Because one thing that you just said concerns me a little bit, which is they want me to do everything. You can't do everything. They have to be really driven. A lot of artists think that because they are so talented, and they often are so talented, that somehow the world is going to come and discover them, and they don't actually want to work really hard. It's too competitive out there now. So one of the things you need to know as a manager is how hard is the act prepared to work.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Matt.
Of the independent artists that everyone put their hands up, how many are actually in bands as opposed to solo musicians?
Does it count if you have a band as a solo artist?
No.
No, okay.
So like 3 of the room, which was generally... So I think that's a difference in that... I don't know if it's a difference, but I think you're self-managing yourself, and I think that is an easier task, that you can switch between the 2 heads without having to organise 3-4 other people's lives at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it does make it probably slightly financially advantageous to travel. I know you do brilliantly, going around the world on your own with a guitar. But if it's 5 people in a van, that's the stage when you probably need more money, and you potentially then build the team. If it's with your backing band and stuff, it's like suddenly becomes more expensive, and he's going to tell me I'm wrong, but I don't know.
I think you're right, but I think that's the reason why there's not many bands in the audience.
Because it's not sustainable, yeah.
We'll touch on that in the next panel as well, which is actually all about touring. We are going to have to wrap this up in a minute, but did you want to... No?
I'd rather take a question if somebody's got a question.
Okay, who's got a really good question?
It's not a really good question. It's just leading on from what he said. I kind of beg to differ with what you have to say because I'm a solo artist, but I make a band sound. And I'm constantly I've got people around me and stuff, but I'm constantly having to get the band together and thinking about them, what their needs are, because I know how it feels. And the music I make is electronic, but with an indie rock feel. So I have to think about, okay, while I'm sort of wandering around the stage doing, my Florence Machine sort of lifestyle, I've got to think who's on the SPD, I've got to think who's on the guitar, I've got to think who's on the bass, and then I'm constantly directing that as I'm going around the stage, and then also off the stage, making sure that if it's paid, they're being paid, when chasing those payments. And it's difficult because you don't want to seem I'm so shy, and I've noticed that lately I've had to just really come out my shell. And sometimes people could be like, oh, you're a right bitch, but it's not that. It's just that I've got people around me that need to be paid too, because they're giving so much to what we're doing. And yeah, so even though it's all about me, I'm really aware that I've got this crew of people around me that need support too.
Which is harder to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I have to do is do the bits that the band don't want to do. I remember a band, was it Smoke Fairies played with you, and there was some problem with money.
I think it was broken hands.
I think you were
but there was a problem with
money. Are you
money.
getting paid?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah. It's just
I think
who do I speak to?
I think you went, actually Paul Ketley, another manager's in the room today. It's long ago, but I think you actually went and asked on my behalf as well, because I didn't have any.
We were like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But then if you're the artist, you don't want to be the ball breakers going no. Whereas I think a manager can get away with it a little bit better. And that barrier is, I think that's part of sometimes. I mean, we had it the other day in Leicester where the band, I think the fee was agreed and they gave us half because apparently the headline band were going to give us the other half. And Belle, the drummer, had gone up and she was literally having a face-to-face argument. I was like, it's all right, I can probably look back on an email and see that that's actually correct. But yeah, it's you want the promoters and the agents and everyone that you've got to have an argument with to not be having that argument with you. Because sometimes that makes it really hard as well, because you're there to be creative and your headset wants to be going on stage in a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
Not saying where's our rider? The pyrotechnics aren't going off too early, guys.
Okay, thank you so much. Can we have a huge round of applause for our amazing panel?